I stretch my eyes across the brine from the firm oaken planks. Many's the tear of my soft grey eyes as I look back upon Erin. There is a grey eye that will look back upon Erin. Never again will it see the men or women of Erin. This is an extract of a poem written about the exile of Colmcille, and it reaches deep into something in our hearts. I want to talk about it. I want to talk about the mix of joy and grief, of remembering lost beauty. In the story of the 6th century exile of Erin Colmcille, we get an appreciation of the depth of this feeling from his words as he sails from view of his native land. He set sail on a curragh with 12 companions on a self-imposed exile from Lochfoyle, and as he sets out into the wide ocean, we are given an image of the seagulls following his timely craft and calling him back home. So it's a poignant scene, and it expresses that the person's being is sewn into a living landscape from which he originates. The living landscape is literally grieving the separation as much as Colmcille is. He's overcome with deep stirring emotions as he recalls his love of his country, and in expressing his grief, he uses the metaphor of the eye being the window of the soul. There is a grey eye, is an eye drained of life and colour. This colour is the emanating spirit that shines from the soul. The eye expresses the soul, and it receives love and joy to the soul. This is a theme we will return to when we contemplate the mind's eye, which is the imaginative desire, a longing whose perspective is oriented to the past. The mind's eye can only recall because it can only inform desire with its experiences. It can recall beauty, and this creates an aching longing for that ephemeral joy that only happens while being present. It is experiential. In Irish we have a word for this feeling, cua. Cua is a grief of remembering a lost joy, the grief of remembering past beauty. The recollection gives joy to the spirit, but the realization of the loss cuts the heart. The Japanese have a word for this also, for which there is no English equivalent. It is pronounced aware, and it is the grief of seeing indescribable beauty. It is the grief of the realization that all things pass, and that even the most beautiful experience will vanish. So to witness a beauty that elevates the soul leaves an exquisite aching within the heart. In the 12th century Japanese story, the imperial court drama, the Tale of Bemji, we encounter this scene again and again, where all the observers are weeping uncontrollably at a moment of artistic beauty. A song is being played with such sensitivity, a poem sees so deeply into the human condition, that people are overcome with emotion and can do naught but weep. I recently received an email from a person who had listened to my music. I'll read it, because it expresses a sense of grief, of having lost connection with heritage. He touched on his awareness that there was something lost which left him separated from something essential to his humanity. I believe this is true, that the heritage is part of the soul, and a connection to something transcendent within our spirituality. He writes, "Firstly, may I thank you for your beautiful and evocative albums. I find it difficult to express the extent to which I am moved when I listen to Unvultish in the Meaning of Life or The Arrows That Murder Sleep. I wish my mother were still alive to hear them. She too would have been moved to hear her language rendered with such poetry, and with such passion, and with so much vivacity." After the introduction he gets into the deeper truth. The person writing was from Australia, by the way. He writes again, "The wonder and mystery I felt as a child whenever I heard my parents speak in Gaelic carried a vague, inexpressible sense that it was a portal into another world. Now, later in my life, I know that it was indeed a portal into another world, into a culture and sense of identity that was mine by right. My parents' decision not to cultivate our Irish identity was driven by their attempt to give us the best chance to fit into 1950s Australian society, a society that was still in places, especially inimical to Irish immigrants. This was a response common to many immigrants' families at the time, and unfortunately still is. So when I listen to your music, I experience quite a complex set of responses. A deep and significant sense of loss accompanies a deep felt poetic truth, a truth about who my parents were and who I am. an Irish-born man far from his homeland, on the land of the Wurundjeri people. However, as the complex layers and webs of identities, home, lands, histories, families, tribes, threatens to overwhelm us, we turn, as Australia's Indigenous people still do, to the honesty, truth and beauty offered to us by music and art. Thank you for your poetic truth that you have offered us. As my mother would have said, God bless you. He ends there. Truth and beauty might be the same thing. I think that without truth, you can't really have beauty. It is the humanity of this that strikes me, with what the Japanese call duare. There's a deep insight that we have both a spiritual and corporeal existence. Our awareness of the world comes through our senses, through our touch, ears and eyes. These are frail and open to being damaged and hurt. We're complex creatures in a society where we must make accommodations for each other's frailties. But it is our spiritual nature that makes sense of the world that we sense. Joy and love are our human responses to recognizing essential truths. And it is the momentous desires, the pressures of this, and the consciousness that creates the upwelling elevation of the soul, which causes the heart to want to burst. This is the grief of Awari. It is in this unconscious state that the poet William Wordsworth recalls a moment of bliss which is shattered by the senses that bring him back to the present. He wrote the poem Surprised by Joy after he awoke from a dream in expectation of seeing his child. The expectation brought him an overwhelming sense of joy, of reenacting a scene of trust and love, but as his memory returned, he recalled that he had buried a child and would not meet again. The tide of joy came in and out in a fleeting second between sleep and waking, and this exquisite moment becomes the subject of his poem. In his dream, Wordsworth was alive in a beautiful world of colour, illuminated with the face of his living child. When he woke to darkness. John Milton wrote of a similar awakening to darkness, when dreaming of his deceased wife, only to wake to a dismal realisation. Methought I saw my late espoused saint, brought to me like Alcestis from the grave, whom Jove's great son to her glad husband gave, rescued from death by force, though pale and faint. Mine as whom washed from spot of childbed taint, purification in the old law did save, and such as yet once more I trust to have full sight of her in heaven without restraint. Came vested all in white, pure as her mind, her face was veiled, yet to my fancied sight, love, sweetness, goodness in her person shined, so clear as in no face with more delight. But oh, as to embrace me she inclined, I waked, she fled, and day brought back my night. Milton, of course, was losing his sight at this time, so the metaphorical darkness that came with his consciousness also returned his loss of sight. The night came with his wakening morning. Every time he woke, he was blind again. For that fleeting moment before consciousness came flooding in, he relived the experience of Muireadach Albanach O Dalaigh, the 12th century Irish poet who wrote, Manam de scair riomsa aréir, Colmcille do binsanuig, rug a brin a mergameen, is ein vladín, we've it. That last line has the same stabbing syllabic beat. As I waked, she fled, and day brought back my night. Muireadach's words, translated as such, are, my soul departed me last night, a pure beloved taken by the grave, taken a perfect, noble breast, wrapped in a single shroud of linen. This experience, captured so visually and lovingly in this brief and vivid stanza, must have come to his mind again and again throughout his life. Cua, sweet and bitter as grave. Surprised by joy, impatient as the wind, I turn to share the transport. But deep buried in the silent tomb, that spot which no vicissitude can find,
love faithful, call thee to my mind, but how could I forget thee? True, what power even for the least a vision of an hour have I been so beguiled as to be blind to my most grievous love. That thought's return was the worst pang that sorrow ever bore, save one only, when I stood forlorn, knowing